Everyone, Lee, Sir Danny, please stand by because we are now going live in 3, 2, 1, let's go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar entitled Leading Through Crisis, Traversing During Turbulent Time. Again, I am JayR Sistona, your regular moderator for your SWEP Webinar Micro-Training Series of the College of Business and Accountancy, together with our university, Our Lady of Fatima University. Let's all be happy because we are now in our series 5 of the 8 series of this hashtag Flexible Practicum Alternative Program through Supervised Work Experience Program, or SWEP Strategy and Business Leadership Institute, or the Synergy. Let me greet all our participants today, which are all aspiring graduating students from our different programs and from different campuses. We are now streaming live on our CBA Connect official Facebook page. So allow me to greet also our CBA faculty and students who are watching us right now. Are you all ready for another twist with today's webinar? Since our topic is all about leadership, we can say that it's never too old or too young to be a great leader because of the fact that initiative is always free. That's why we invited 4 young student leaders from Quezon City campus to share their leadership stories and ask specific leadership questions to our speaker later during our Q&A portion. Again, someone will going to take over my place later during our Q&A portion for our featured student moderator from Quezon City campus this time. Okay, in connection with our topic today, probably many of the CEOs and senior leaders have been asking for help and support from their teams because they are now unsure of how to lead during a public health crisis, unlike anything they've ever experienced before, right? So we can say that many strategies that worked for them before are not working now. Times have changed, to say the least. The question now is, what is the most common strategies for leading effectively in our current situation? Good leadership can be a challenge in the best of times, but amid an unprecedented pandemic and economic crisis, we can say that even the best bosses are struggling with how to navigate turbulent waters. So guys, get ready with your pen and paper to take down notes and learn some great tips from our invited resource speaker, who is an educator, migration anthropologist, civic education and educational reform advocate. Okay, to give us the synopsis of today's webinar series, let's all welcome the great leader of the two colleges, the Dean of the College of Business and Accountancy and the Dean of the College of Hospitality and Institutional Management, our leader, Dean Ignacio C. Cordova Jr. Hi, Dean. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, JR. As usual, you always amaze the listeners or the participants of our various webinars,
Thank you so much, Dean.
especially during Saturday. As I always say, Saturday is always intellectually stimulating Saturday afternoon. We discuss important topics that are necessary for the complete knowledge of our students in business and leadership. Today, good afternoon, my colleagues in the academy and at the same time our students in the College of Business and Accountancy. Today's topic is very interesting and it's very tough as well. It's difficult for us to put flesh on this topic, and this topic is all about leading through crisis, traversing during the turbulent time. Well, the first time I have encountered the word turbulent time, it was during the time I was taking business policy way back when I was in college. And turbulent times, it's actually it's an exciting exploring turbulent times in business and exciting endeavor, learning endeavor in college. The current situation has been testing most businesses, their ability to operate and manage in a crisis like this. In an unprecedented crisis like this, let us consider the word interpretation of crisis in Chinese literature, which is pronounced Wei Ji, which invites everyone to see both danger and opportunity. Last week webinar, I have presented short statistics or statistics about digital money, digital commerce, and you have found out that during the crisis, there's an emerging opportunity when it comes to digitalization. I know it is now a great time. It's a great time for us to test new ideas and prototype concepts, and the best time to prepare for future unprecedented crisis, not just during health crisis, but for other forms of crisis. This alone, this kind of approach in practicum or in the work from home, and this work simulations through online or remote approach or the remote practicum, it's actually we are prototyping a solution. We are prototyping a concept that it will really work, and probably with your evaluation or your assessment, when we can say that whatever we have prototyped this per semester will be very successful next term. Our students and researchers in the academy are now being challenged to innovate their mindset and learn to upskill for them to be future-proof and ever ready to accept the new model of leading and doing business in a more complex situations. In a more complex situation, it is now a challenge. A complex situation, not just in business, not just in enterprise, but actually even in our household. One of the potent solutions in time of crisis is good leadership. I remember I posted one in Facebook that good school leadership really matters in this time of crisis because it is an effective response by a company which requires transparency, accountability, and above all, strong and well-informed leadership. So the topic today, it's very, very interesting in the sense that you are being invited to test your leadership in doing business. Last week we have seen a lot. We have discovered that we have a lot of entrepreneurs from Valenzuela campus. We have entrepreneurs taking practicum this semester, and I'm pretty much sure you are leading your business and doing your business in this crisis, and you have so many approaches. You have prototype so many approaches, and we are very excited to know more about your approaches. Businesses need to be clear about who is making the decision, keeping the members of the organization regularly informed, and maintaining the organization independence. Businesses are now rapidly establishing their immediate and long-term risks. In strategic planning, we were taught about tactical and strategic plans. And this time, last week, our guest speaker in our webinar taught you on how we can establish business continuity plan. I really hope that the BCP in your little business, or probably in your practicum, you can create the business continuity plan of your mom, of your dad, or business continuity plan of your own business. So how the leaders step up to lead effectively and turn their team's attention back to the challenges to meet corporate goals. Our resource person this afternoon will talk about some of these probably actions and best practices on how you can be best leaders and how you can lead and do business in times of crisis like this. And ideas for inspiring managers and leaders as they look to strengthen their leadership to prepare their team for the new model, for the new business endeavor, or for whatever pursuit that they have during this unprecedented crisis. Students and my colleagues, I am happy that we have this topic, and once again I would like to salute the SWEP coordinators for bringing out this important topic in business, in doing business. And this is about leading through crisis. I really hope that everyone will enjoy this Saturday webinar, and all the takeaways that you can get from our resource person will bring remarkable milestone in your business. Good afternoon, and back to you, our dear moderator, JayR.
Thank you so much, Dean. Your insights are on point, and we always learn something new from you as always. No? Okay, moving forward to the highlight of today's event, let us welcome the SWEP Coordinator of CBA Valenzuela Campus, Ms. Edel Alcantara, to introduce our resource speaker today. Ma'am Ed, how are you?
Hi, yes, sir. I'm very good. Good afternoon to
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
Yes, our resource speaker for today is the Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Visayas. He is considered a son of the UP Visayas, having spent his high school and college years from 1978 to 1986 in UP Visayas. He also served the university for a full decade, joining its faculty in 1987 after a year of teaching at the West Visayas State University. He is an insider but also an outsider. In 1997, he embarked on a journey that took him out of the university and out of the academe, and eventually also across academic disciplines. Returning to full-time academic work in 2000 at the University of Asia and the Pacific, he became an advocate of civic education with colleagues in that university. A growing interest in cultural anthropology and migration led to a PhD in Philippine Studies in 2009. This interest brought him back to the UP system in 2017 when he retired from UANP and joined the College of Education, where he now teaches anthropology and sociology of education, mainly to teachers and would-be teachers. It has been an exhilarating 3 years. Nothing compares to knowing people who toil in the trenches. His perspective, therefore, comes not from the upper reaches of the professorate, where he might engage in distant contemplation, but from somewhere less tranquil and more modest, where roots and route keep him grounded and shape what comes into view. He is the author of selected local and international publications with interest on anthropology of contemporary migration, Philippine history and culture, civic education, anthropology and sociology of education. He is also a member of scholarly organization, an academic leader, and a public servant. Lastly, he had his PhD in Philippine Studies Anthropology from the Tri-College program of the University of the Philippines, Diliman in 2009. He had his Master's in Arts in Political Science from the UP Diliman in 1992 and had his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and History from the UP Visayas in 1986 and a graduate of UP High School in Iloilo in 1982. So let's all give a round of virtual applause to our resource speaker for today, Dr. Clement Camposano.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you for your invitation. Um, these are so exciting times. We are in the midst of not only a crisis, but in my case, we're in the midst of a transition uh, in our university. As you know, I was only recently appointed as the 11th Chancellor, and so I am now in the process of organizing the management team and making preparations to take over the helm of the university. So although of course it's very toxic times because we are all saddled with many urgent concerns. But I think your invitation for me to speak on leading to a crisis, uh, I think couldn't have come at a better time because I'll be speaking from experience. No? I mean, this is as close to a crisis as you can get. Taking over the university at a time when you have a pandemic, and of course, trying to ensure a continuity of education, the continuity of university services during this difficult time. And so, anyway, hopefully, I can share a few ideas with you, with students that might help them navigate crises, different kinds of crises. But first, a qualifier. My field is not in management, as the introduction, brief introduction mentioned. My field is actually anthropology of migration, and of course, anthropology of education. And so my ideas basically come from that direction. But I think that there are a lot of common ground. There is a lot of common ground. At the same time, I think there's certain ideas that in my field that I think would have would have very interesting application in management and in leadership. Anyway, so let me get right to subject. Subject of the talk this afternoon is leading through crises, through turbulent times. Well, of course, when you talk about leadership in crisis, the usual elements, of course. There's, the need to be decisive. There's a need for clarity, and of course, the need for effective communication. I mean, these are things that are fairly standard. Not only in crisis management or crisis leadership, but in fact in leadership in general. But I would like to talk about something more that is less obvious, something that is less the subject of discussions, lectures on management. And I'm talking about three essential elements, I think, that could really impact leadership in crisis. First, I think that leading in a crisis requires, or that leadership in crisis, or crisis leadership, should be cohesive leadership. It should be cohesive. And that, I mean, that kind of leadership that can draw people together, that can bring people together around a common negotiated version of reality. Okay? That's the crucial thing. A common version of reality. Now, most of the time the problem with many leaders, especially because they are the leaders and they are often told that they're very competent and great, they're respected, they're given all of these kinds of, they're given constant adulation. The thing is that leaders tend to assume that they know best. That in fact, the way they understand a situation is, in fact, the best way of understanding it, that it is perhaps the most correct way, if not the only correct way of understanding a situation. That, I believe, is often a fatal problem in leadership. That's the reason why I will insist that, in fact, to lead in a crisis, you need to be cohesive. You have to aim for cohesion. And by that, I mean that the leader must be capable of bringing together not only his management team, his immediate subordinates, but also the entire organization around a common version of reality. Now, of course, there's an important assumption here. Okay. The assumption here is that, in fact, there are many versions of reality. Many versions of reality. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of that. Our usual tendency is, and this is not just true in leadership, but this is true in the field of scholarship, in academic fields. We tend to assume that when you see something, you tend to assume that other people are also seeing the same thing. That other people are also seeing the same thing. Or that when you hear something, that other people are also hearing the same thing. Well, in anthropology, we are taught that, in fact, there is no such thing as immaculate perception. Okay? maybe if you're Catholic, yeah, there's immaculate conception, but there's no such thing as immaculate perception. Meaning to say, you always see the world through the mediation of ideas, through the mediation of language, through the mediation of concepts, through the mediation of ideology, and of course, during our time, through the mediation of technology. Having said that, I think it's important to point out that precisely because there are, in fact, many ways of seeing things, that there is no such thing as immaculate perception, that a leader must strive not only to impose or enforce his own understanding of reality, his own sense of what the situation is, but must in fact endeavor to not only communicate his version of reality, his understanding of the situation, but must be prepared to enter into a dialogue, into a discussion with people so that a common understanding can be arrived at. If a leader fails to do that, there might develop at some point a serious disconnect. That people may just tell you that they agree with you, they believe in your version of things, believe in your reading of the situation, but in fact, what they're really trying to do is that they're just trying to avoid being the object of your, they're just trying to avoid being on your bad side. But in fact, they have other ideas. They have serious disagreements with you, but they're simply not prepared to disagree with you because you're the leader. Well, this is something that an anthropologist is in a good position to actually critique, because as I told you, we in anthropology, one of the things that we are constantly taught and reminded of when we, for example, do field work, when we write our ethnographies, is that we are all positioned observers. We are all positioned observers. We are all looking at things from a certain vantage point. Okay? And our personal history, our education, our level of education, our culture, our values, our interests, in fact, shape how we understand reality. And this is a concept that can extend into very, very fundamental things, in fact. Let me give you an example. If we're talking about emotions, for example, we tend to assume, most people would not think that emotions are universal. When you say love, for example, love is understood the same way all over the world and across cultures. Okay, so when you say love, it's just a matter of translating it into different languages, and the meaning is there, it's properly communicated. The thing, however, is that years and years of anthropological research have revealed that, in fact, emotions are not universal. They're not. Okay? The capacity for emotion is universal. But how emotions are enacted, how people make sense of their emotions, is in fact culturally mediated. To cite a very good example, in some Pacific Island communities, for example, the concept of love is often seen as a sad emotion, not as a happy one. Okay, it's well, there's an element of happiness there. There's also a very distinct element of sadness involved. Okay, and it may come as a shock to a lot of people, but that's how they understand love. Actually, if we reflect on our own experiences about this thing, it shouldn't be too difficult for a Filipino to understand love as something that invokes loneliness. If you're familiar with many Filipino love songs, I think easily half of them are actually lonely songs. These are sad songs. There's always a term, concept of pangungulila. It's always present in many of these songs. So what I'm trying to say is that emotions are culturally mediated. Okay. One other example would be, for example, if you're talking about emotions like, in Tagalog, you would say tampo. ang isang tao ay nagtatampo. That word is untranslatable to English. There is no translation for tampo in English. Okay? One that captures the meaning of that word. So I think that points out precisely the idea that you don't encounter reality in its pristine form. What happens is that you encounter reality by making sense of what you experience through your senses. And when you make sense of something, you interpret it. When you interpret it, you deploy language, you deploy ideas, you deploy, in fact, ideology, you deploy many other things. And that is how a person is positioned. That's how we are positioned by this thing. Now, how does that apply? Insights like that, how does that apply, for example, to leaders? Well, maybe we can make do with a bit of an illustration. You can imagine, for example, two people standing, one person standing on top of a building, and the other person standing at the sidewalk, by the pavement, by the sidewalk. If the person on top of a building sees far and wide, okay, he can see the entire city. He can see the grids. He can see the streets. He can see the imprint of planning in the city. Okay? In short, this person is able to see or experience what one sociologist calls the imaginary totalization of the city. On the other hand, the person standing on the sidewalk cannot see the city. He will only see the sidewalk. He will only see the street corners, the things that are in front of him. Now, if you ask these two, if you ask that question, who among these two is in fact closer to reality, then you'll have to admit that in fact both people are close to reality. They are in fact seeing different versions of reality. Okay? But they're seeing very substantially different versions. The person on top of a building is able to look at the strategic view. And you may compare that to the perspective of managers, CEOs, people who sit on top of organizations and who make plans. Okay? Of course, those plans are based on certain assumptions. They're based on numbers. They're based on reports. They're based on aggregations of data. The person on the street, he does not have a strategic view. His perspective is tactical. Okay? It's tactical. He may not be able to plan his actions the way the guy on top is able to do it because he doesn't have all the information. What he can do is that he can take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. He can, for example, if he's walking, he sees that in fact there's a street corner there. There's a sign that says no entry, but then nobody's watching and there are no guards. He might as well take advantage and take a shortcut. Okay, so he's in that sense he is engaged in a tactical kind of action. He takes advantage of an opportunity. He cannot stockpile these opportunities. He must act every time he sees these opportunities. So, if you can look at many people who are parts of organizations, it is the case that oftentimes many of these people can be compared to people who are walking in the sidewalk. They don't really see the big picture, but they see a lot of things. They see the realities on the ground, and they do understand many of these realities on the ground. So my point is that in fact, for an organization to be able to act effectively, to respond to challenges effectively, that there must be a dialogue between these two perspectives, at the very least. And I'm not saying that there are only these two perspectives. There could be so many other perspectives. So there must be a dialogue. There must be conversation. And they must negotiate a common version of reality. Precisely because they both have, I think, accurate understandings of what the situation is, except that their understandings are informed by their respective positionalities. Uh, if you're a government planner, for example, and you're talking about poverty and inequality, a government planner, say somebody who is sitting on top of NEDA, maybe one of the undersecretaries, one of the regional directors, would look at, for example, numbers. He would look at reports. He will use aggregation of data to say that this is the picture of poverty in the Philippines. Well, that person is taking a strategic view of the situation. A person who has just lost his job, a person who doesn't know where to get his food for the next meal, may not have a strategic view. He may not see the big picture. But you cannot honestly say that that person understands poverty less than that person who sits up there. Because after all, being poor is something that is oftentimes, it's an experience that cannot be reduced to numbers. Okay. You can't say that, well, my household income is like this, therefore I am poor. Some people may not actually have a lot of money, but they don't feel poor. On the other hand, some people have enough money, they're actually above the poverty level, but they feel that they're impoverished. They feel deprived. Sometimes that's the problem when you're looking at numbers. We tend to delude ourselves into thinking that numbers, because they are objective, will always give us an accurate picture. Well, the thing is that in the human sciences, one of the things you will learn is that not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted actually counts. So not everything that counts can be counted. Not everything that can be counted actually counts. We may have to rely on other forms of knowledge. We may need to rely on embodied forms of knowledge. And that's the reason why we need to have dialogue. There's a need for conversation between leaders of an organization. But a leader must know not only how to communicate his vision, not only how to sell his vision, but in fact, the leader must know how to listen to people who take a different view of things. And that he must be prepared to engage these people so that they together can arrive at a composite version of reality. What's the problem? What is the situation? Thinking about companies, you can, for example, imagine a company like Nokia, which was once the leader in the consumer electronics. Nokia practically invented the commercial mobile phone. And there was a time when people who wanted cell phones really will desire a Nokia, because that was, in fact, the brand. What do you think happened to Nokia? I think that at some point in its history, when its sales started to plummet, I think the leaders failed to understand the nature of the challenge facing Nokia. Maybe they were so convinced, maybe they were so confident that since they invented the technology, since they were the pioneers, that in fact the technological edge will allow them to in fact defeat competition and will allow them to keep the market share. But that did not happen. That did not happen. Eventually, Nokia was eaten alive by other companies who were designing not only better phones, but in fact who were reinventing the phone. Okay, so the device that you have, this mobile phone that we have, we keep talking about it as a mobile phone, but in fact it's no longer a mobile phone. It's a pocket computer. You do many things with it. the average mobile phone, the average Samsung, has more computing power than that computer that sent the Apollo mission into the moon. Okay, that's how powerful it is. And the computing power that you find in the cell phone is precisely what makes that phone, that particular device, very different from a phone. Okay, it's not only just a phone. Making calls is just one of the hundreds of functions of that device. So what I'm trying to say is that, in fact, there must have been a time when Nokia was still thinking about mobile phones, and the competition was already thinking about reinventing the phone and talking about introducing other devices that will eventually replace the phone. So, in short, in Tagalog, you say na pag-iwanan ng panahon. And that wasn't supposed to happen because Nokia was a technology leader. Yet, because perhaps they had a problematic understanding of what the reality was. Maybe they had a very skewed, very limited understanding of the nature of the challenge, the nature of the problem, that they failed to respond, that they failed to develop the right approaches. Okay? Another example would be, for example, when American companies were trying to deal with the Japanese competition in the 1970s and the 80s. And the Americans have always been convinced about the quality of their products because they're Americans and they're always right. They're always the best. And they've always believed that American cars are the best in the world. But here's the problem. In their own markets, their models were being outsold, okay, with Japanese cars. Not only with Japanese cars, but even really small cars like the Volkswagen Beetle. So the Americans and many industry leaders really couldn't understand why people were buying these really small cars. They're only a fraction of the power of a Mustang. Very small. Why were these models outselling American cars? So somebody like Lee Iacocca actually did his best to change the way people were thinking in Ford. To understand the problem. Said, look, you've been assuming all along that American cars are the best. They're not. They're not. It's just your conceit. And one of the ways that Lee Iacocca convinced many American, not just managers, but workers, that they were not the best, that they were not producing the best, was he bought a Japanese car and he put it in the shop floor, in the factory floor, so that the workers there can go and see and touch what a Japanese car looks like. And most of the reactions were like this. Oh, gee, these Japanese, they're really making good cars. So for the first time, they realized that, in fact, the situation was more serious than they thought. Anyway, those are just some of the examples of the need for leaders to enter into a dialogue, enter into a negotiated version of reality, precisely because they do not have a monopoly of rectitude, they do not have a monopoly of knowledge, that there are other perspectives that are equally valuable, and that what the leader must do is to try to bring together people so that you can arrive at a composite version of reality. Okay? Now, the question is, how do you go about doing that? That's very challenging, because if you're the leader, you're used to people agreeing with you all the time, or people in fact telling you that they agree with you when they don't, because they don't want to, they don't want you to be displeased. Okay, so it's tricky, it's difficult for a leader. Now, even for a leader who wants to listen to people, it's difficult. So the next point, aside from cohesiveness, from being cohesive, the next element I'd like to talk about is being empathetic. Empathy. Okay. To be empathetic means to engage in that imaginative exercise of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Okay. To put yourself in the other person's shoes. To simulate his understanding of things. Now, earlier I said that we are all positioned observers, that we all have biases. To be empathetic means to try to see why that person thinks the way he does, why he thinks differently from you. To try to put yourself and assume his point of view as best as you could. That's being empathetic. Now, for many people, it's more like a kind of a life strategy or even a kind of a self-help advice. But empathetic understanding is a very important element in anthropology. Okay, we anthropologists, we engage in what we call ethnography. Okay? An ethnographer basically engages in what what the Germans call. There's a term in German, verstehen. Okay? Verstehen. Verstehen, if you translate that into English, means empathetic understanding. Okay? And pretty much describes what an anthropologist actually does. An anthropologist, for him to write a good ethnography, must immerse himself in the lives of the people he is studying. So he must live in the community, and he must speak their language, practice their rituals, eat their food, because all of these things will allow the anthropologist to experience not only the everyday life of people, but to, in fact, that will allow him to understand why these people say these things, why they make sense of certain situations this way and not that way. So it's called empathetic understanding, empathy. So in anthropology, it's the foundation of our research practice. Empathy, empathetic understanding. Of course, there are limits to this. Okay, there are limitations to, in the same way that there are limitations to objectivity. There's no such thing as perfect objectivity. Well, there is also no such thing as perfect empathy. You can always try to understand another person's point of view, but you will never completely, you can never completely assume that person's point of view. And this is also what we remind many of our students, many of the people that we're training to be ethnographers. You can go to a community, you can immerse for 1 year, or you can befriend somebody and speak in the most diplomatic way, be the most engaging person that you can be. But you can never completely capture that person's point of view. The reason for that is because you cannot put yourself inside his head. Okay? Even if you spend a lifetime in a community, the very fact that you're just there to study other people really changes how you look at things. Okay? So an anthropologist who goes to a community and stays there for an entire year will understand that community very well. But at the end of that period, he will leave that community and he will go on to write his work, his research, and he will go on to present it, and then hopefully he gets promoted for it. Maybe he makes a name for himself. But that's really what an anthropologist does. In effect, he may acquire a very good understanding of that community, other people, but because his interest is different, because his role as a scholar positions him differently, that he can never be fully empathetic. Okay? So aside from empathy, there is a third element that the leader in crisis, leadership in crisis must have, and that is reflexivity. We have to be reflexive. And reflexivity is nothing more than an awareness of your own positionality. If you're a manager, and you're trying to communicate your version of what the problem is, or you're trying to pull your organization together to address a serious problem of, let's say, declining sales or maybe very high overhead costs, you can always try to bring people together and try to listen to them, try to be empathetic, try to understand their point of view. But the thing is that you can never truly abandon your own positionality. You are the leader. You have stockholders to take care of. You have bottom lines to think. If things don't work well, you could lose your position. But all of these things, and of course, the fact that you have the power to steer the organization, all of these things clearly will position you in a way, okay, that the other partners in your dialogue, the other people in your organization, uh, uh, will not. Okay. In the sense, they cannot assume that same position. So you have to be aware of your own location, your own positionality. You have to be aware of the fact that the reason why you think this way and not that way is you have your own interests and that you have a bias. Why is it important? Because that's unless you're reflexive, then you will have difficulty dealing with contrary opinion. You will have difficulty engaging other people in dialogue. So you need these things. You have to be cohesive, but you need also to be empathetic and you need to be reflexive. Which means that you need to do more than just have a vision or have a clear solution and then communicate it down the line. Okay? Those are important things, but those will not carry you through in a serious crisis, in a complex organization, because you may in fact get it so terribly wrong. You could get it. You could be off the mark. Okay, and I think if you study the history of businesses, big and small, you realize that in fact, many of these great businesses that are no longer with us made those kinds of mistakes. Okay, or leaders made those kinds of mistakes. Just one more example. When Bill Gates was trying to develop his company, we all know what that company is. It's Microsoft, right? He was told, or they were told, by the captains of industry, the people who preside over companies like IBM. Anong sabi sa kanila? The real money is in hardware, not in software. Dito sinabi nila. The reason why these people say, these supposedly very knowledgeable persons, the reason why they said that is, well, of course, they were at the helm of a company that was selling hardware. Okay, I mean, IBM. So they've been successful at what they do, selling business machines to people, selling computers, selling fax machines, selling typewriters. That they've also thought that in fact the real money is in hardware. That's pretty understandable, precisely because at the time, the idea of a software was in fact new. In fact, that word had to be invented precisely because it was unprecedented. I mean, during those years, it talked about software. Nobody understood you. Okay, people didn't really understand what that meant, and certainly people didn't understand the value of software. In fact, what Bill Gates did was to actually buy the operating system from another company, and that's what he developed into Windows. So the guys who sold him the operating system, they knew the technology, they understood the technology, but they didn't quite understand the significance of what they just invented. Because if they did, they would not have sold it to Bill Gates in the first place. Right? That's it. Here's Bill Gates, who simply acquired it and who had this vision and eventually made a technology giant. He created a technology giant out of those very modest beginnings. Okay. So these are cases where people who were established individuals, people who were respected, people who were very knowledgeable, reading the situation terribly wrong. And I think these are very instructive lessons on the need to, to be reflexive, on the need to engage in dialogue, and to, not to be too invested in your version of reality, but to, if I always aim, especially in a large organization, to aim at a composite, negotiated version of reality. Because I've said there is no such thing as immaculate perception, because we are all position observers. Okay, so well, those are the things that I'd like to bring up. I think that elements that would be valuable to anyone who is trying to lead in a crisis. Okay, and hopefully you could use those concepts, cohesiveness, empathy, and reflexivity as guideposts in dealing with all kinds of situations. Okay? So thank you very much. And hopefully you will have some questions so that I can elaborate on some of these things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc Clem. I was amazed by your unique way of discussing the topic, no? I love the storytelling approach you did for today's webinar. Very unique and very interesting. Okay, Doc Clem, please stay for a while and for another more minutes, because we're going to entertain some questions for our open forum. Okay, this is it, guys. So let's welcome our featured student today, featured student moderator, Mika Loreen from CBA Quezon City. Hi, Mika. Mika, hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sir JayR. Yes.
Yes. Okay, Mika, let me also introduce your other four students, no? Four young student leaders that we have in this Zoom call. We have Kervin Espinas, JPIA External VP. The JPIA is one of the CBA organization or student organization in Quezon City. We have also Kim Pelobelio. Kim is an SK Kagawad, Sangguniang Kabataan, council, SK is a councilman to represent the youth in each barangay in the Philippines, as we know that. We have also Kes Kino. Kes is the team coach of Saitel. Saitel is a private-owned contact center company that provides outsourced sales, technical support, customer service, and other business processes to large companies. Okay, and lastly, we have Von Contonhos. Von is an executive secretary of a charity organization, and Von is also a team leader merchandiser. Okay, Micah, the floor is now yours. Again, I will just sit back and relax, and you now do the talking.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you, Sir JayR. Also, good afternoon to our dearest Dean, Dr. Ignacio Cordova Jr., to all program heads, to all practicum coordinators across campuses, of course, to all my co-OJTs, and last but not least, to our resource speaker, Dr. Clement Camposano. Thank you for that very insightful talk on leadership during crisis. We have so many takeaways this afternoon, which would enhance not only our leadership skills, but also our communications and social skills, which are very useful for us. Personally, I really like the part where you said that the leader's job is to reunite not only the management but also the entire organization in the same same version of reality. Other people doesn't think the same way. That the leader must not impose his own understanding of reality, but must be prepared to a common dialogue. It just went straight to my heart.
Micah, I think you are mute. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where did I stop?
But that's okay. I
Sorry.
think there's a few seconds.
A few seconds. Yeah. And I'm sure that this also gave my co-OJTs the idea of how to lead effectively, especially during crisis. Let me ask you, Kervin, what interests you the most?
Hi, Michael, and good afternoon, Dr. Clemwell. I found it interesting when our resource speaker talk us about leadership, because leadership is important, especially now that we are in the situation of pandemic, right? Now, I want to ask Doc Clem, based on your discussion, how do leaders manage and cope up during crisis?
Well, that's a very complex question. First, I think we have to think about uh, what kind of leadership are we talking about? Okay. In a military context, obviously, different demands. There would be situation would be different from, let's say, a political leader, or when you talk about democratic leadership, then that's the situation is very different from, let's say, leadership in a more hierarchical setting. So that would really depend on what kind of leadership you're trying to exercise. Okay, but I think there are things that would cut across all of these contexts uh, uh, when you think of leading to a crisis. Uh, and that's precisely why I thought that we need to really understand how organizations are put together, and so a leader must understand the nature of the organization. I think that's crucial. A leader, sometimes because we all make assumptions about the things around us. When you're at the top of an organization, you tend to assume that in fact that organization is cohesive, it exists, it will work, and so on and so forth. But of course, oftentimes those assumptions fail. Sometimes you assume that that your organization uh, is strong when in fact that organization is weak. Okay? Sometimes you make a decision assuming that once you make a decision, you communicate it, you cascade it downwards, the people will just implement it. The bureaucracy will work. In fact, it doesn't. Or you have a decision, and if you assume that that decision will be interpreted the way you would want to interpret it downstairs, but in fact that doesn't always work. Okay? Sometimes you make a decision, and people downstairs will interpret your decision in a very different way. So organizations are very complex. Okay? Very complex. People are very complex, and I think the leader, whether you are in a military context or in a marketing context or in the academe, I think the first order of business is really to make sure that your assumptions are valid. Okay, you need to be critical. You need to revisit your own assumptions. You need to be capable of revisiting your own assumptions. I think that's the most crucial thing. Otherwise, you could make decisions that are well, the intention is good, may become may have disastrous consequences not only for you but for your organization. Okay, so that's how I would respond to your question. I don't know if that was a complete response, but maybe you can ask a clarificatory question.
Thank you for that, Dr. Clem. Thank you, Kervin. As a JP officer, I'm sure that enlightens you more. Moving on, Kim, I know you are a community leader in an SK Kagawa. Sure, I also have a question for Dr. Clem.
Yes, hi Mika. Good afternoon. And I really find the webinar very informative and helpful for me, and nakaka-relate talaga ako. And I actually have a question for Doc Clem. Sir, how can members of an organization measure an effective leadership po?
Okay. Well, first of all, an effective leader is able to keep the organization united or cohesive. Okay. That would be the first test. You need to be able to keep things together, at the very least. Because if you don't keep things together, there's no point in doing other things. Okay? Of course, you have your goals. You have your goals. So are you achieving your goals? If you're in a university setting like myself, and I run an autonomous unit of the UP system, there are very clear goals. Like, are you able to develop new academic programs? Am I able to build so many classrooms? Are my campuses peaceful? Are they safe spaces, and so on and so forth? Okay, so you need to be able to achieve those goals. Okay, but I think one other important thing here is that effective leadership is that you must be able to learn. Okay, you must be able. Your organization must become a learning organization. I think that's important. Yeah? Hindi yung organization na dating gawin, no? Paulit-ulit na lang na hindi natututo. No? I think it's important that organization acquires the capacity to learn from its decisions, to make better decisions over time. In fact, to understand and learn from mistakes, to see mistakes as mistakes. You know? There. So I would look at those things. I would look at those as the measure of good leadership. Yeah.
Thank you very much, po, sir.
By the way, if I may just clarify, earlier I heard the phrase leadership skills earlier. I think Micah was using that phrase, leadership skills. Of course, when you talk about leadership, you talk about certain skills, right? But leadership is not all skills. Okay, I think it's always important to remember three things all the time. Okay, it's not just skills. Okay? One, there's knowledge. Knowledge. Then two, you have skills. And three, I think you need to have dispositions or habits. It's very important. No? Kung sa Filipino pa, no, ito yung KKK, di ba? Kaalaman, kasanayan, kaugalian. Because sometimes if you look at only skills, you forget that in fact you need a certain level of abstraction. You could be very inflexible if you're not able to reassess your own skills in light of new knowledge. Okay. On the other hand, we do many things in this life that are not really based on cognitive knowledge, but are actually habitual things. Like, how do you make sense of a situation is oftentimes habitual. Okay? We are all, creatures of habits. Whether you're a leader or a janitor, it's the same thing. We're all creatures of habits. And we need to understand that is essential to the way human beings function. Yung habits na yun. And habits can be physical habits, but they can also be mental habits. Okay? I love to point out the fact that in some cases, for example, I keep hearing, because this is part of my interest in citizenship. Oftentimes I hear people complain about how Filipinos lack discipline. Okay, yan. Problema palagi ng mga Pilipino daw, kulang sa disiplina. No? There's that Tagalog word that people love to use, pasaway. Okay, pasaway. Actually, I'm not sure if Filipinos really lack discipline, because Filipinos do many things that are in fact very difficult things, prepared to make serious sacrifices for loved ones, endure loneliness, endure separation. Outside, they are the paragon of professionalism. Out there in the middle of the ocean, on board merchant vessels, on board warships, or in an oil rig. Filipinos are sought after for their work ethic, and they clearly they don't lack discipline there. So I'm not sure if Filipinos actually lack discipline. But what I think the situation is this. I think the situation is this, that in our country, oftentimes when we are in public space, like the street, we don't look at public spaces as shared spaces. We look at them as free for all spaces. And that's really a matter of habit. No? Ano na yan eh, kaugalian yan. No? So kung free for all space, edi gawin ko yung gusto ko, di ba? Karapatan ko yan. Ano? Hindi mo iniisip na mayroong ibang gumagamit niyan at kailangan mo rin pangalagaan. Okay? I think that's the problem. No? It's not really that we lack discipline. Okay? But I think that we lack certain civic habits. So I think that's the value. That's the value if you're able to think in those three terms. No? You enrich your conceptual vocabulary so that you're able to see a much, as I said, much more accurate picture of reality. So it's not just skills. Okay? When you're talking about leadership, it's not just skills. Although there are a lot of skills involved in leadership, there's also knowledge. Okay? Skills and then habits. Habits. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much po, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Clem. My name is Kathleen Kino.
Hi.
And I used to be a coach who manages a team that oversee quality processes and policies. And with all that is happening around us now, brought about by the pandemic, how do you compare leading under a normal condition and leading during the new normal?
Well, obviously, situation is much more demanding now because of the pandemic. We are forced to do things that we have not been doing before. We are to speak in uncharted waters. I think that's the critical thing. We're in a situation that it's really uncharted. We've not been here before. No? In UP, for example, we were all forced to go into online learning. Okay, and we're used to performing in a classroom. I'm used to talking to my students and having engaging discussions with them. Now I have to do it online. Okay. Uh, Sabi ko nga, the transformation is from a performing body into a talking head. Okay? Ang worst, you become a disembodied text because kung asynchronous learning yan, puro ka textual, di ba? Nagpapalitan na lang kayo ng notes, no, or messages. That is a process that is so difficult for many people. Okay? That transforms the way we understand teaching. So, given that situation, we were all in uncharted waters. I think it's crucial for leaders to understand that, to have a very clear sense of what the situation is. This is uncharted waters. We've not been here before, so we have to be very flexible. We have to be very flexible. If we design something, like I designed, for example, a course guide for one of my graduate courses, from the very start, I had to tell my students that, okay, I did my best to design this, but we could actually be revising this 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line, because really, I don't know how this will fly. Okay, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if this will work, but you need to be open, you need to work together, we need to be here for each other, that, at some point, I hope you'll understand that I may have to revise this, I may have to make certain adjustments, and so on. So that's the critical part, I think, helping people that you lead, people who are part of your organization, to appreciate the fact that as a leader, you may not know everything. Nangangapa ka rin, no? And it's important for people to understand that their leaders are not perfect, that their leaders don't always know what to do. Okay? And it's important for leaders to admit that they don't always know what to do. In fact, in the affairs of the state, in the affairs of government, institutions are designed in such a way that you already factor in that assumption that the president of a republic do not always know what to do, that may not have the best information. That is why he cannot just make any decision he wants. He has to rely on a cabinet. He must be surrounded by advisors. That when he makes an appointment, these appointments will have to be vetted by the cabinet secretary, for example. So I think that's important. I think maybe the thing about leading in a crisis is that it teaches humility for people. At no other time will humility serve you more effectively. At no other time would humility be as valuable as in a situation such as what we are finding ourselves in at the moment. Okay. Talagang aaminin mo na hindi mo alam ang gagawin mo, na baka naman merong mas matalino sa iyo, mas maraming alam kaysa sa iyo, no? And it's liberating. It's liberating for people to at least admit that they don't know. No? It helps, it creates a healthier organizational culture. Hindi yung the boss always knows what's best. That's toxic, and then that's a disaster waiting to happen. Okay? If the boss always knows. So I think one way would be siguro, one good practice would be to encourage subordinates, to encourage colleagues to speak up, right? To speak their minds, to make contributions to decisions by making suggestions, by by disagreeing if they have to disagree. Because as I said, we are in uncharted waters. Kaming mga matagal na nagtuturo. I've been teaching for what? 3 decades. I've been in 4 different universities. I've managed institutes, departments, and now I'm managing a university. I'll be the first one to admit to my vice chancellors that, look, there are matters that I will have to entrust to you simply because they're not in my field. They're not in my sphere of competence. Okay? And in fact, that's exactly what I had in mind when I recruited people to serve as my vice chancellors or they're the equivalent of your vice president. I have a very diverse. I have 4 vice chancellors. It's a diverse collection. My vice chancellor for academic affairs is a microbiologist. Okay, it's a microbiologist. My vice chancellor for administration is an expert on management information systems. My vice chancellor for research is a fish biologist. Okay, and my vice chancellor for planning and development is a professional planner. The only lady in the bunch. I suppose there's probably a good reason for it. So it's a very diverse group, and I already told them that we have to act collegially. I may be your boss, I may be the chancellor, and we all act by my authority. But in fact, we have to steer the ship together. Okay? I can't run this by myself. Okay? Although at some point I may have to own up to the decision because all these other decisions, there's such a thing as command responsibility, but I have to rely on you for many things. And sometimes these are lessons that you learn the hard way. They don't teach that in school. You learn that by making mistakes. Okay, you learn that by making mistakes. That's why students, don't be afraid to be student leaders. Don't be afraid to join organizations. And if you're a young professional, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how we all grow as professionals. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clem. And indeed, those 3 elements essential for essential leadership are also applied during this new normal. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Dr. Clem.
Yes, good afternoon.
I'm Nilvon Cantonhos. Thank you for providing us this afternoon great insight, which led me to my question. Being an expert in the field of civic education and sociology education, how can you apply this to your leadership skills as a chancellor of your education?
One of the things that I picked up as a civic educator, it's precisely the importance of habits. Okay. It's like this, no? Alam mo, pag tiningnan mo ang history ng mga curriculum natin, noon pa meron na tayong tinatawag na civica, di ba? Civic education, noon pa yan, no? Panahon pa ng mga Amerikano, meron na tayo niyan. Okay? Today, if you look at the curriculum, anong makikita mo pag pinag-usapan ng civic? Usually, you have social studies, di ba? I think they call it AT, no? Araling Panlipunan. Ano? Okay. The problem is, I think all of these courses don't really teach citizenship. Of course, they teach you how a government is put together. They teach you how laws are made. And maybe if you have a very lazy teacher, they'll just make you memorize the name of the barangay captain and all the members of the barangay council, that sort of thing. You know? But that's not citizenship. Okay. What I have learned in my advocacy, in advocating for civic education, is that so much of what we call citizenship is really made up of habits, okay? Civic habits. Right? And the foremost inspiration for this, in fact, is Jose Rizal. Okay. Let me tell you the story of Jose Rizal. I love the story of Jose Rizal. You're familiar with the 2 novels, right? Yeah. The first novel is No Limitangere. The second novel is El Filibusterismo, correct? Okay. And we've always been taught that the Fili is the continuation of the Noli. Actually, yes and no. It's a continuation because the characters actually live on in the novel, the next novel. It's also not a continuation because those are two very different novels. Why? Because in the No Limitangere, what Rizal is saying is this. Once you remove the friars, once you remove the superstition, this cancer that eats up the body politic, the Philippines will become very progressive. The Philippines will become a modern country, a modern society, and we will have our freedom. Okay. So ang problema lang talaga praile. Okay. The most evil people in the Noli are the priests. You look at it, di ba? Even the other characters may redeeming value pa, no? Yung walang redeeming value, yung mga katulad ni Padre Damaso, di ba? Sa bandang huli, sabihin pa ni Rizal na actually, galit siya kay Ibarra kasi siya actually ang tatay ni Ibarra. Galit siya kay Ibarra dahil siya ang tatay ni Maria Clara. So talagang napaka-evil ng mga characters doon. In El Filibusterismo, Rizal is saying a different thing. When that novel ends, ano nangyari? Di ba? Namatay si Simon, di ba? Nung malapit na siya mamatay, nakausap siya ni Padre Florentino. At ang tanong ni Simon, bakit ganito? Bakit walang katarungan? Bakit pinagkakait sa akin ang katarungan? Anong sagot ng pare? The reason why you are not given justice is because you don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. And it's the same thing. It's exactly what he had to say about Filipinos. Sabi nga nila, with or without the Spaniards, you will still be the same. With or without the friars, you will still be the same. Why? Kasi ang mga Pilipino ay hindi handa magsakripisyo para sa kapakanan ng bayan. You are not prepared to make sacrifices. You're all caught up in your own selfish interests. You cannot see beyond your own selfish interests. So in that case, you don't deserve freedom. You don't deserve to be free. In short, kung sa Noli Me Tangere, ang pinakakaaway ng mga Pilipino ay mga praile, dito sa El Filibusterismo, ang pinakakaaway ng mga Pilipino ay ang sarili nila. Di ba? So two very different novels. And that's the reason why pagkatapos ng nobela ay sinikap ni Rizal na bumuo ng isang organisasyon. Ang pangalan ng organisasyon ay La Liga Filipina. Ano ang purpose ng La Liga? Ang purpose ng La Liga ay upang gumawa ng isang samahan na kung saan merong yung mga tao ay merong ganong kahandaan upang magsakripisyo para sa ikabubuti ng marami, for the common good. So the purpose of the Liga Filipina was actually, if I may quote, to create in the archipelago a compact, vigorous, and homogeneous body, which is really to make sure that Filipinos are able to rise beyond their own selfish interests. Now, this is not some big moralistic statement that Rizal is talking about, although it includes that. But in essence, what that means is that we acquire the habits, the necessary habits that will allow us, to care for each other. It will allow us to suffer temporary inconveniences and maybe make little sacrifices so that we can pursue common goals. So kunyari, meron kang basura na hawak-hawak. Ngayon, dahil sa disiplina, ay kakayanin mong hawakan yan ng 4 na oras dahil wala kang makitang basurahan. That's a good test, right? Ginagawa ba ng mga Pilipino yan? Kung pumunta ka sa sinihan, kapain mo yung ilalim ng upuan, anong makikita mo? Bubble gum, di ba? Why is it like that? Because people do not want to suffer the minor inconveniences. Yun yung sinasabi ni Rizal. that inability to make these sacrifices, little sacrifices. It's not that Filipinos are evil. No. It's not that we're not capable of making sacrifices. No. In fact, we make sacrifices all the time. We are even prepared to be separated from loved ones. But the problem is, kailangan personal. Kailangan kakilala, kailangan kamag-anak, kailangan kapuso o kaya kapamilya. Diba? Yung mga tao na hindi mo kakilala, walang halaga sa'yo. See? It's that problem, the idea of making sacrifices, of suffering inconveniences for anonymous others. See? We have a real problem with that. Kasi sa atin, kailangan lahat dapat personal. Lahat dapat kakilala, di ba? We're so addicted. We're so addicted to intimacy. Okay? That we're incapable of making sacrifices for anonymous others. But see, that's precisely what we need to do. Okay? Alam mo, ang Pilipinas ay mahigit 100 milyon katao. Hindi mo naman kayang kilalanin lahat yun. Di ba? Imposible naman na maging kaibigan mo lahat. No? So for the most part, ang pagiging Filipino is really assuming that identity that links you to 100 million anonymous others. Now, how do you do that? Practice. Habits. Mental habits. Parang ano yan eh. No? Parang pagsakay ng bisikleta, di ba? Hindi ka naman matututo sumakay ng bisikleta kung magbasa ka lang, di ba? There's only one way to learn how to ride a bicycle. It is to practice riding a bicycle. No? It's the same thing with citizenship. You have to practice doing little things, paying your taxes, throwing the trash in the trash can, making sure that kids are safe. Little things that you constantly do until you acquire those civic habits. Okay? So siguro yun yung ako, doon ako nanggagaling. So as a leader, parang the way I understand my role is I sort of define my role in an educative manner. I don't only manage university, I don't only run a big organization, I also try to be an educator. I also try to teach people I work with, my colleagues and our constituents. I also endeavor to teach them civic habits. That's what so when I make policies, that's what I do. I make a policy not only to address a certain problem, but also in addressing the problem that people learn to think about the common good. People learn to think about others. Not really think, but to make it part of their mental habit. So that, over time, we become a better organization. Over time, we become better individuals. We become better citizens. So, yun lang po. No? I hope, very long answer to your question, but I hope I answered your question and not really strayed far from the point. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Clem, for your very enlightening answers to all of our questions. We are delighted that you've joined us for our webinar this afternoon, which gave us the opportunity to learn about leadership skills, which is one of the most important skills that we should learn in our practicum, and of course, we should possess. And I'm turning back the floor to you, Sir JayR.
Okay, thank you, Micah. Good job. Thank you so much to all of these students, especially to those 4 young student leaders from Quezon City campus. Okay, and most especially, thank you very much, Doc Clem, for answering those questions and for the great talk. It is our great pleasure to have you with us today, no? And to present the certificate of appreciation to our resource speaker today, let us welcome the SWEP Coordinator of Antipolo Campus. Let's call Mr. Isagani Valenzuela II. Hi, Sir Gani.
Hi, hello, Sir JayR. Thank you. Good afternoon, Doc Clem. I hope is okay. The certificate of appreciation reads, Our Lady of Fatima University College of Business and Accountancy Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Dr. Clement Camposano in grateful recognition of his expertise as resource speaker and supervising experience program. He is dubbed as Leading Through Crisis, Traversing During Turbulent Time, given this 31st day of October 2020 at the Our Lady of Fatima University, Valenzuela City, signed by the college dean, Dr. Ignatius C. Cordova Jr.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having
Okay,
me.
okay, let's give Doc Clem a virtual clap for a great presentation and great talk. Okay, so let's welcome the BSA and BSAT and the BSAIS program head of CBA Valenzuela to give us the closing remarks. Miss Juliet Diliana. Ma'am Diliana, Miss D.
Hi, good afternoon. Good
Good
afternoon,
afternoon,
everyone,
ma'am.
especially to our visionary dean, Dr. Ignacio C. Cordova Jr., and to our very inspiring resource speaker, Dr. Clement Camposano. Thank you very much for the wonderful insight, Doc Clem. I'm sure our viewers and students had such a wonderful time listening to the elements of your best practice. It is indeed important to note the three essential elements that impact crisis leadership. One is cohesive leadership. Second is empathetic leadership. And the third one is flexibility. And the last one, these elements are valuable in dealing with all kinds of situations. Lastly, according to Doc Lem, leadership is knowledge, skills, and disposition or habit. With that, on behalf of Our Lady of Fatima University and the College of Business and Accountancy, I am Mrs. Julieta Idiliena, saying goodbye and good afternoon to one and all. Thanks for the time listening and learning. Stay safe and God bless us all. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Ma'am D, for the gist of talk today. Okay, so this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending. Hope again you have learned and enjoyed with today's presentation. And thank you so much, Doc Clem, for gracing our event today. Thank you for your time and effort and also for sharing awesome insights about leading through crisis. Thank you to our college dean, Dean Cordova, who is again the prime mover and the visionary leader of this 8th SWEP Webinar Micro Training Series. And thank you to our very supportive CBA program heads and faculty members. And of course, we would like to thank all the people behind the scenes who have planned and prepared everything to ensure that we will have a very insightful and substance-filled SWEP webinars. Quezon City SWEP Coordinator, Ma'am Sheila, Val SWEP Coordinator, Ma'am Edel Alcantara, Antipolo SWEP Coordinator, Mr. Isgani De Jesus, and our Mr. Perfect from all the way from Pampanga, SWEP Coordinator, Sir Chris Gueco. And also thank you to our regular technical expert, my marketing student, another promising young student leader, Mr. John Leonard Diawan. Hi, Lee. And thank you very much to all CBA students are present in the webinar. Your presence and your participation every Saturday afternoon are indeed manifestation of your commitment to learn, to update yourselves, and to be aware of the industry that you will soon be part of. So again, see you again next Saturday, November 7 for another SWEP Webinar Micro Training Series. Series 6 is all about advancing entrepreneurship through business incubation with Miss Janine Crisostomo, the owner of Tea Haven Multiplace. Okay, wow, another substance-filled Saturday afternoon, right, everyone? Thank you, and good afternoon, and let's continue to rise to the top.
You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top, 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 top. Just choose the best, not like the rest. Your future at stake, it's make or break. In here you will be with Fatima. Fatima, together you will soar high like an eagle. You fly and make it to the top. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top, 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 top. You can't go wrong. You making the right decision, tested and tried. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top, 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 top.
An institution, it's right decision. Strong foundation, great education. Where the old top should rise to the top. Make it to the top, you will be with the tops.
You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top, 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 top. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. 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 Rise to the top, 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 top. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. You will rise. Rise. Rise to the top, top, top.
Hey everyone, and keep safe.